Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches English Language and Literature A-Level. This video is going to focus on comparing two key texts for the Edexcel paper 2. I'm going to be looking at The Great Gatsby and Othello, and the focus today is going to be on relationships, romantic relationships in particular. I've just picked a few little areas to look at. I'm not going to cover absolutely everything because I'd be here forever. But the one thing I will say to you, it's really, really important that if you get a question as broad as relationships or romantic relationships, pick an angle. You know, if you try and comment on every single relationship there is, all you're going to end up with just a sort of superficial bouncing around between paragraphs. So pick two characters and then do a deep dive. So you've got some options here in this video. I'm going to talk about Gatsby and Desdemona. I'm going to talk about Othello and Gatsby, and then I'm going to look at some relationships that are unsuccessful in different ways, because let's be fair, all romantic relationships are unsuccessful in this text, or in these two texts. And on that depressing note, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start off by actually comparing Gatsby and Desdemona, which I know might not be the kind of obvious connection, but what I want to draw your attention to is that both of these characters are presented by the respective writers as having an absolute unwavering devotion to their respective partners. So Gatsby to Daisy and Desdemona to Othello. And in fact, this unwavering devotion that they have either leads to or ultimately ends their lives, leads to the loss of life or livelihood, or, physically they are killed. Gatsby, I'm not actually talking about his death. I'm talking about what he is willing to risk for Daisy. So he chooses to take the blame for Myrtle's death, knowing full well what this will mean. He is willing to risk his life because of his unwavering devotion to Daisy. And likewise, of course, we see not, yes, Othello does kill Desdemona, but where we see this idea about it being complete, her love being unwavering, is in that die, she is willing to take almost the blame for it. Now, even though she says a guiltless death I die, meaning she didn't do what he, is accusing her of, she then says, nobody, I myself, farewell, commend me to my kind lord, oh farewell. So even in her death, caused by the hands of her husband, she is still willing to protect him. So again, unwavering devotion. But in both cases, this unwavering devotion is clearly misplaced. Okay, so let's look at Gatsby. After this event has taken place, after Daisy has killed Myrtle, he stands outside her house, and in a typically Fitzgerald way, you get this incredible symbolism about the light in the house. So he has said that Daisy is going to go, and if she gets in any trouble with Tom, she's going to turn the lights on and off. And obviously the green light has always been so symbolically linked to his love for Daisy, and so this idea of him stood in the dark waiting for lights to be flickered is really symbolic of whether or not their love is still real. And then at the very beginning of the next chapter, when he comes home, he says, nothing happened, he said wanly. I waited, and about 4 o'clock she came to the window, stood there for a minute, and then turned out the light. So massively symbolic moment for the end of their relationship once more. And then obviously you can extend that line of thought about this misplaced devotion, because then in his death, she doesn't even send a flower. She doesn't write a card. She doesn't come to the funeral. So this is misplaced devotion. Likewise, Desdemona has misplaced devotion. In this moment, immediately after she has protected him, so that he can not be punished for her death, that to him is a further sign of her deceit. He first picks up the lie. You heard her say herself, it was not I. And then she's like a liar gone to burning hell. 'Twas I that killed her. So this she has gone to burning hell because she is like a liar. So you've got this little embedded simile. She's like a liar, gone to burning hell. So he actually sees her devotion to him as a sign and further evidence of her deceit. So absolutely misplaced devotion in this case. Of course it's misplaced. He kills her. Spoiler if you haven't seen it already. Another interesting thing to look at, again continuing with Gatsby and Desdemona, is the idea of symbolic love and repeating the past and using symbols of the past, which I think is a really interesting way in as well. This is obviously a really, really famous and powerful moment from Gatsby where he talks about whether or not he can repeat the past. And he says, why, of course you can. He looked around him wildly as if the past were lurking here in the shadow of the house, just out of reach of his hand. I'm going to fix everything just the way it was before, he said, nodding determinedly. She'll see. So he has this feeling that if he can go back, if he can freeze this moment and get them back, everything will be in that kind of perfect place. And this little bit of emotive language and metaphor, after she had obliterated 4 years with that sentence, meaning I never loved you. So what he wants her to do is obliterate 4 years of past and return to 5 years previously, and they can kind of start that up again. It's one of the clues that their love is not going to be successful, because clearly you can't repeat the past. What's interesting is Desdemona does a similar thing. Desdemona says to Emilia, "Prithee, tonight lay on my bed my wedding sheets." And these are the sheets that they would have laid in on their first night of marriage, when they would have assumed, we assume, consummated that marriage. And again, Emilia does this. "I've laid those sheets you bade me on the bed. All's one. Good faith, how foolish are our minds. If I do die before thee, prithee, shroud me in one of those same sheets." So dreadful moment of ominous foreshadowing here, where she imagines being dead and wrapped in her wedding sheets, which is of course exactly what is about to occur, creating a bit of dramatic irony for there as well, because we know that Iago has said to Othello, "Do it not with poison, strangle her in her bed, the very bed she hath contaminated." And Othello has agreed, good, the justice of it pleases. So there is this really, really stark irony being created here for the audience, and it makes it even more tragic, the fact that she is trying to use these symbols of the past, a very recent past, to try and recreate that love. She says earlier in the previous in a previous scene to Emilia that, I can't remember the exact quote, but she says that you can't ask a man to always be like he is on his wedding night. But the tragedy here and the difference between these two characters is Gatsby is trying to recreate something that felt very real 5 years ago. Now, if you actually think about the time scale of the play, we're talking about no more than a couple of weeks. So she's already trying to go back to a more successful past, but literally from only 2 weeks ago. And I think that it's worth considering the expectations and kind of thinking about context here as well, because you can look at this, you can look at Gatsby's unwavering devotion and desire to repeat the past simply as his naivety. It's never going to be realistic. But with Desdemona, 21st century audiences can get quite frustrated with her here, because we want to say, no, don't try and recreate that past, run for your life. But we've also got to sit it in that kind of gender expectation of that unswerving loyalty to your husband is expected. It's certainly a sign of her virtue and her goodness, again, sat within the context of the time. But there is an expectation that she will be unwavering in her devotion and her loyalty. So here, where she's trying to use the symbols of love, it's about trying to establish that. Now, you can flip this on its head, if you want. You can use some of the same ideas, but with a slightly different comparative comment. So you could use this to compare Othello with Gatsby. So Gatsby has an unending faith in a love that isn't real, misplaced devotion, whereas Othello loses faith in a love that is valid and worthy. So you can take the same idea, but kind of just mess with it a little bit if it fits better, because I always think that when you're doing comparisons like this, you need to have a deep dive, you need to have an angle. You can't look at every single relationship. So if you thought to yourself, no, I'm writing on relationships, but I'm really going to stick to the Othello and Gatsby and just look at them, you can still use this, but just reframe it, looking at Othello losing faith, because of course we can use contrasts as well. And sticking to Othello and Gatsby in the notion of relationships, I just thought I would doff my cap to the early stages in the text, because I think this is really important in building the tragedy and creating pathos at the end. Because obviously, if we didn't get a sense of their love being true and real and wonderful, it wouldn't feel as tragic at the end. So look at this moment where Othello and Desdemona are reunited in Act 2, Scene 1. First of all, the exclamative, "Oh, my fair warrior." Look at that oxymoron, a juxtaposition between the adjective fair and that noun warrior, metaphor in itself. And this is so important because at the early parts of the play, it is clear that one of the things that Othello loves about Desdemona is her strength and her will and her voice. And that is what Iago then uses against her. So actually at the beginning, there's so much irony in that at the beginning of the play, she's much more forthright and much more subversive, and he loves her for it. And at the end of the play, she's submissive and obedient, and he hates her for it. But at this moment, this heightened love is shown through their exclamatives to each other, "Oh, my fair warrior, my dear Othello," and then look at Othello's speech here. "It gives me wonder great as my content to see you here before me. Oh, my soul's joy! If after every tempest come such calms, may the winds blow till they have wakened death, and let the labouring bark climb hills of seas, Olympus high, and duck again as low as heavens, as hells from heaven. If it were now to die, 'twere now to be most happy, for I fear my soul hath her content so absolute, that not another comfort like to this succeeds in an unknown fate." Ah! Never have truer words been spoken, because this is literally the last happy moment that he will have in his life. But it's really interesting, again, the promise that he's making here about how he would weather any storm if it would create a sense of love like this. Again, so much irony in those words, because he is about to weather the worst of storms, but he's not going to get through it. He's not going to feel that peace again. And by using the storm metaphor, this metaphor of the weather, it reminds us of this kind of evil, this plan that has come in on the storm over to Cyprus through Iago on that monstrous main. His monstrous birth is coming to fruition. And in this moment, Othello really kind of draws, well, Shakespeare really draws attention to it through the irony built up because of the language patterning. But yeah, like I was saying, if you didn't have this, then you wouldn't have that, because what would be the point? We've got to, just like with Othello as a tragic hero, we have to see him high so that we then see the fall. It's the same with the love. Now, with Gatsby, there's some debate here. So yes, it is clear there are parts of the book where you see his absolute delight and wonder in her, and his, love for her, the whole thing, the whole pursuit of her, the unwavering devotion, obviously is a sign of his great love. And there's this quite wonderful moment where when Daisy first goes over to see the house, and remember the house is symbolic of him. So really it's about opening himself up and saying, "This is who I am." This is who I am. Love me. So he hadn't once ceased looking at Daisy, and I think he revalued everything in his house according to the measure of response it drew from her well-loved eyes. So it's very much a kind of, does she like this? Yes, I'll keep that. So he's almost like reshaping and reevaluating his identity based on how she feels. Sometimes too, he stared around at his possessions in a dazed way, as though in her actual and astounding presence, none of it was any longer real. Once he nearly toppled down a flight of stairs. So yeah, you can make the same argument that Gatsby's incredible love for Daisy makes it more tragic at the end, where she ultimately rejects him and chooses Tom again, and then rejects him once more by not attending his funeral. But if you wanted to have a slightly different slant on this, you might say, well, okay, that's true, but was it really love, or was it something else? So this is part of the story that he tells Nick after Jay Gatsby has been shattered by Tom's hard malice. And he recalls, however glorious might be his future as Jay Gatsby, he was at present a penniless young man without a past, and at any moment the invisible cloak of his uniform might slip from his shoulders. So this is when he has managed to enter Daisy's life the 5 years before, and he's been able to do it because Fitzgerald's metaphor explains it here, the invisible cloak of his uniform, i.e. he can hide the fact that he's penniless because, you know, you're in a kind of classless situation as a soldier. So he made the most of his time. He took what he could get, ravenously and unscrupulously. Eventually he took Daisy one still October night, took her because he had no real right to touch her hand. So in this moment, we see that his early motivations were not pure. It was not centered on love. It was a desire to just be with a girl because he could, knowing that he couldn't be in her world. His plan was to leave her. You can see quite clearly from the euphemisms here that what we are talking about is a sexual relationship. He would have, you know, especially when it talks about how he did it with these adverbs of manner, ravenously and unscrupulously. His plan was to have sex with her and leave, which is horrific. And it's only then that he starts on the quest. He finds himself wedded to her. But you can argue against this idea and say, is it real love or is it money? Because we understand later on all of this description of Daisy's voice and how wondrous it is. And you get that line where Nick says she's got an indiscreet voice. It's full of, and Gatsby answers, money. He enters into Daisy's world because she's got money. So yes, on the surface, it would appear that tragedy is created, more pathos is created by the fact that his devotion to her is misplaced, but argue against it and say, however, some might disagree with this interpretation because there is an argument that he never was with her for love in the first place. It was always motivated by money and climbing that social ladder. I hate doing that. Everyone wants Gatsby to be a love story, and then I'm like, no, it's not. Sorry, guys. Right, I just wanted to make a couple of references to some other relationships. You might find that it works with other kind of questions as well. And really what I want to focus on mainly is Jordan and Nick, and then give you some options of how you might compare them. You could, of course, in all of this, because what I'm really going to be talking about is sort of relationships that are unsuccessful, disrespectful, unrealistic. You can, of course, put Tom and Myrtle in here, but I have done another video which compares Myrtle and Bianca, so I would be repeating quite a bit of that, so do have a little look at that video. But let's start off just talking about Jordan and Nick. Now, Nick's decision, Nick's romantic relationships. I must do a video on Nick and his relationships because it is very interesting. We've got this girl back home that essentially he's sort of jilted out of fear that people might think they're getting married, and then it turns out that he's actually been writing letters to her all along. So there's a little bit of this strange relationship going on in the background. But then he's got this desire for Jordan. And what is interesting is what he finds attractive about her. And yes, we can think about male gaze in the way that he's constantly describing her body and its masculine ways. Make of that what you wish. He says, suddenly I wasn't thinking of Daisy and Gatsby anymore. So this is after Jordan has told him the whole story. And he realizes, suddenly I wasn't thinking of Daisy and Gatsby anymore, but of this clean, hard, limited person who dealt in universal skepticism and who leaned back jauntily just within the circle of my arm. Oh, be still my beating heart. Sorry. There is an element here that he's sort of suggesting that because Jordan comes across as cold, he's safe to have a relationship with her. He likes the fact that in his mind, she's limited emotionally. You know, he's already said that, you know, she's a liar, and that's, you know, that's women for you, incurably dishonest. But there is certainly an element that he wants to be with her because he won't have to have a proper relationship with her in his mind. He can't hurt her because she's hard and she's cold and she's scornful. And so when he throws her over, you get this real kind of idea of his almost disdain for her. So this is after the Myrtle moment, the Myrtle death. I was feeling a little sick and I wanted to be alone, but Jordan lingered for a moment more. I'd had enough of all of them for one day, and suddenly that included Jordan too. So his feelings for her just disappear because they weren't really real. They weren't really real because you can't fall in love with someone because they're hard and limited. It was really convenient, and he thought because she was hard and limited, she wouldn't get hurt. And so the moment that he decides he's done with her, he's done with her. But is Jordan hard and limited? No, she is not. No, she is not. This is their final conversation. Do you remember, she added, a conversation we had once about driving a car? Why, not exactly. You said a bad driver was only safe until she met another bad driver. Well, I met another bad driver, didn't I? I mean, it was careless of me to make such a wrong guess. I thought you were rather an honest, straightforward person. I thought it was your secret pride. I'm 30, I said. I'm 5 years too old to lie to myself and call it honour. Oh, what an awful, awful way to break up. If you haven't seen my Gatsby videos, have a little look, but I'll explain. Obviously, we've got this brilliant metaphor of relationships being like cars that comes from an earlier conversation. Jordan is saying here that she thought she was safe with him. He thought he was safe with her because she didn't have feelings. She thought she was safe with him because she thought he was good. She thought he was a good man. And now she's saying, but I was wrong. You're just as bad a driver as me, i.e. you're not very good in relationships. So he has completely misjudged her. You know, his decision that she was cold was not right, was not true. So this is a relationship where people don't know each other, they don't understand each other, and where he sees her as a kind of a convenience. But what's really awful about it is this moment here, where he says, I'm 30, I'm 5 years too old to lie to myself and call it honour. So the suggestion there, he's talking about the idea of things like marriage. So he's saying, I'm too old to say, well, I should probably marry you then because it's the honourable thing to do. So the suggestion there is, just like Gatsby with Daisy, that they too have been having a sexual relationship, because that was the kind of deal. If you got yourself in, and there is that night where he comes home at like 4 a.m. after being with Jordan. So there is this idea that he also was willing to use her, knowing that he didn't really love her or want to be with her, and now at this moment throws her aside and says, oh well, you know, I'm too old for this now. So the kind of level of scorn and disdain in relationships that is demonstrated here through Jordan and Nick is how you can make a link over to Othello. So obviously you can talk about Iago and Emilia and the scorn and the way that, one, he certainly misjudges Emilia, so you've got that level, but this idea of being scornful of your partner. How now, what do you hear alone? Do not you chide. So immediately we can see from that little exchange that he's stern with her, because she's saying, don't tell me off. Like the moment that she walks into a room, I have a thing for you, a thing for me. It is a common thing to have a foolish wife. Obviously, we have his standard Iago disrespect for women, but there is another level here because there is innuendo, because the noun thing in Shakespearean times was also a metaphor for female genitalia. And so what he's actually saying is that her thing is a common thing. So he's calling her promiscuous. And then in order to justify that insult, he then shifts the topic and then says to have a foolish wife, which is still him calling her foolish. There is this kind of, you know, horrible disconnect. And of course there is, because let's be fair, Iago's a stone cold sociopath. So can he love? Probably not. But this relationship between Iago and Emilia, where she does his bidding and he uses her until he's done with her, and of course in this case he ends up killing her. And then you can also compare Jordan and Nick to Cassio and Bianca. Again, there's more of this stuff on my Bianca Myrtle video to have a little look at. But I think this is really interesting for a nice bit of analysis AO2. If we look at this metaphor, she haunts me in every place, and then so hangs and lolls and weeps upon me. So this listing, these dynamic verbs, and all of them, hanging, lolling, weeping, haunting, right? All of those words demonstrate women or convey women to be needy, under burden, and clingy. So again, it's this idea of, oh, keep them at bay. Use them when we want to, yeah, but keep them at bay. He, like Nick, also has no intention of ending up in a relationship with Bianca, and he is perfectly happy to shake her off and to scorn her and laugh at her. But you could actually draw a real parallel by looking at this verb here. Jordan lingered. So again, the idea about lingering, staying too long, being clingy, being needy, and again, it has this response. I've had enough of all of them, and that included Jordan too. So you can definitely make some parallels here between these. And again, yes, of course, you can bring in Myrtle and Tom as well, particularly for the idea of like that scorn. Myrtle, Tom, Iago, Amelia work really well together. If you think about that horrible moment where he's like, oh, Myrtle can get you a letter of introduction. So he mocks her for her class and her status. So obviously, if you get a question on relationships or romantic love or something like that, you've got too much to talk about. So you need to have an angle, okay? You wouldn't be able to cover everything that I've put on this video, but you might find a part of this video and think, yes, that's the kind of bit that I want to write on, and I'm gonna do a deep dive on that. That's the kind of idea that we're going for. That's it from me. A little bit of a flyby. Give me a shout if you've got any questions, or if you want any different areas of the text to kind of back up any of these points. Just drop me a line in the comments and I will get back to you. But otherwise, all I shall say now is thank you very much and happy revising.